countries whose human rights records we consistently and vociferously condemn, but they are our execution cohort. And we stand with these countries as the international dynamic towards repeal builds. From 1988 to 2010, the percentage of countries abolishing the death penalty went from 44 to 78%. And retentionist countries, retaining the death penalty, went from 56 down to 22%. So the momentum, not only nationally, but also internationally, is increasingly towards repeal. These give you a sense of where we are headed regarding the death penalty. All right. But remember, in calling us to think about this practice, Sister Helen says, don't just focus on statistics. Frame this as an ethical issue, which is at the center of your ethics center. In the end, I think she's right. It is fundamentally a moral issue. The death penalty is an interesting topic because this practice discloses our moral reasoning. You can tease out of it how we think about punishment. It discloses what moral issues are most important to us. And it also discloses the kind of human community we are and we seek to become. We have had the death penalty since our founding as a nation. But since our beginning, people in the United States have been conflicted about this practice. Some of our founding fathers supported it. Others wanted it ended, but as a way simply of distancing ourselves from the British, that we were different from the British. Others judged it to be cruel and unusual punishment. One of the co-signers of the Declaration of Independence, Benjamin Rush, who actually founded a college right near my college, Dickinson College, argued that he was opposed to the death penalty at the beginning of our country because he thought it has a coarsening effect on a society. So interestingly, he opposed it not for what it does to those who are sentenced by it, but for what it does to us as the sentencers, as the members of society. Vicki and I, when we talk, we often do programs together. And many of them, it's very small audiences. So we can have a dialogue, all right? And what I had thought of doing was actually trying to stop at this point and get you to talk to each other. But right before we began, and then I would get some feedback from you and I would learn about where your thinking is. But Andy and I, right before I started, said, that's going to slow things down. So I'm going to keep moving so that we can have enough time to talk later, even though I really want to know right now what you're thinking. Okay. I have found this practice is very interesting and important to think about. It draws on a whole range of disciplines, so it's very good for a university to be thinking about the death penalty. It gets up on the table a whole range of very important moral issues, and very complex ones that we oftentimes don't want to grapple with. It's a practice which reasonable people disagree about. Right? You can have people who hold very principled positions with strong justification on both sides. So I think it's very good to talk about this at a university because it teaches you how to engage in civil discourse so that you can see that reasonable people can disagree on important moral issues. It seems that there are two levels to the discussion of the death penalty. You can distinguish these two levels, but they can't really be separated. And I'm going to talk now about the two different levels. On the theoretical level, the focus is on whether we can justify this practice as a type of punishment. Can we give sufficiently strong reasons for retaining it or for abolishing it? And that's where philosophers like to go. Philosophers and theologians have explored theoretically this form of punishment, which Aristotle identified as a type of rectificatory justice. The word rectification meaning you want to right wrongs that have been done. And is rooted in a kind of righteous anger that we feel when grave harm doing has been done to people. But the death penalty is also explored on the level of praxis, on the level of the practical. Should we continue to have this practice, or should we end it, given how we practice it? And that's a different kind of question. If there are problems with this practice, can we reform it? Can we make it just? Or is it a system that is so broken and so unrepairable that it should be ended because it cannot be mended? And these are the questions that people struggle with. What I want to do is first lay out, very briefly, some of the issues that are on the practical level, and then move to the theoretical level. Your state framed debate about the death penalty to a great extent in terms of costs, which is a very practical concern. As with other states, the leading argument in California, at least to us on the East Coast, appeared to be an economic one. You were concerned about budget savings. The fact, which surprises many people, that the death penalty is a prohibitively expensive punishment. And many states feel they just can't afford it anymore, especially in times of severe budget crisis. The costs of the death penalty are burdensome to states, especially when compared with capital cases resulting in a sentence of life without parole. According to numerous recent studies, it costs 3 times as much to prosecute a homicide case with a death sentence as a similar case with a life sentence. I'm going to give you some figures from Maryland because I know Maryland better. In Maryland, a study showed that lifetime cost to taxpayers for capitally prosecuted cases from 1978, when they reinstated the death penalty, to today will be $186 million. That translates to $37.2 million for each of the 5 executions the state has had since 1978. 37.2. Right? The average cost to Maryland taxpayers for reaching a single death sentence is $3 million. That is closer to $2 million more than a non-death penalty case. This includes investigation, trial, appeals, and incarceration costs. At every single phase of a case, a capital murder case costs more than a non-capital murder case. Some people frame this as a fiscal rather than a moral argument, but I would disagree. I think fiscal budgets are moral documents. We have limited resources to be used for a range of goods. The uses of resources to support one good diverts resources from other goods. When we spend enormous amounts of money on the death penalty, that means alternative goods cannot be funded, such as employing more police officers, crime prevention efforts, supporting crime victim families, spending more on education, poverty reduction, health care, drug rehabilitation. Governor O'Malley of Maryland has argued that ending the death penalty will generate financial savings in the criminal justice system that can be channeled, and that's what he wants to do with the money, and it is written into the bill that the funding that is saved from this will be directed to preventing crime and providing better services to family members of murder victims who are absolutely neglected in the criminal justice system. He is convinced more good can come through this shifting of resources. So even though he's arguing financially, it's a moral argument. Fiscal concerns have been at center stage, but other moral concerns continue to be troubling to people. Of all the current concerns that trouble people regarding the practice of the death penalty, and this is even people who support it, there is one issue that is deeply troubling. It is the greatest concern, and that is the risk of executing innocent persons. With very good reason, people continue to be troubled by this. For the death penalty stands alone. It is isolated as the only wrongly applied punishment that can never be corrected. It can never be rectified. It leaves an irreversible and permanent injustice when it is wrongly applied. And we know the death penalty system is a flawed system. It is not surprising, given our human fallibility and the limitations of our criminal justice system, that there will be errors. For every 9 persons who have been executed since 1976, 1 person has been exonerated and released from death row. That is an astonishing error rate. 1 in 9 persons wrongly sentenced to death. In aviation, we would not allow a plane company to fly with that rate. I would not have gotten on a plane to come out here if I knew 1 out of 9 crashes. All right?